My presentation will focus on the political impact of the ongoing war and what it means to be for all the belligerents not willing to stop or not heeding to the international call for cessation of hostilities, which has now, pay attention, has come down to cessation of hostilities for humanitarian access. It was coupled before the call for cessation of hostilities was coupled with political dialogue between the warring factions. But I think the West is now giving up on that and watering down the call for cessation of hostilities only to allow humanitarian access for more than 5.5 million population of the Tigray regional state. So what does it mean politically? What is this doing to the Ethiopian body politics, that we have a government that is led by, don't forget, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and unwilling to accept calls, international calls for cessation of hostilities. And at the same time, also going into a national election come Monday. What is this doing to the body politics of Ethiopia? This is one point that I like to focus on. The other is the lack thereof in the domestic narrative in Ethiopia, and that includes the media and the government-sponsored narrative, which completely does not take into consideration the people of Tigray, and hence overly reliant on the political dynamics between the TPLF and the federal government. The scenes of the TPLF of the 27 years and the helplessness of the federal government in dealing with the TPLF. This is the overall narrative. And what is the most impactful effect of this narrative is that it completely cancels more than 6 million people of the Tigray regional state out of the equation. So these two dynamics are eventually leading into a failure in a transformation of the politics under the leadership of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, which would see a united Ethiopia, a unified Ethiopia, and a prosperous Ethiopia. So here is the reason. The very fact that the government refused to heed the international calls for cessation of hostilities rests its narrative in the idea that the government considers the TPLF as a non-existing entity. And hence, in fact, the TPLF has been labeled as a terrorist organization by the parliament, which did not have representatives of the Tigrayan regional states in and of itself. So the government considers that getting into cessation of hostilities or getting into an agreement to enforce cessation of hostilities requires two parties on equal footing to agree to something. So because of that, the government is refusing to allow cessation of hostilities. This in itself is because the government and its supporters are completely disconnected with the dynamics of the war that is ongoing, which according to the government is happening in a very sporadic areas. The last account is 2 hotspots that the government needs to deal with. And it completely forgets that this war, this law enforcement, which has turned into a civil war, has turned into a rebellion by the Tigrayan people against the Ethiopian state. This dynamics is missing from the analysis of the government and from the understanding of the government and its supporters from the space in itself, which would not force the government to accept cessation of hostilities. And this is why this war is not going to be over anytime, because for any close observer of what's happening in the dynamics there, this has turned into a war of the people of Tigray against the state of Ethiopia. It has turned into a full-blown rebellion. And getting into or accepting international calls for cessation of hostilities requires the bare minimum of recognizing the nature and the dynamics of this war. And if we do not do that, and if we assume the war with a complete understanding of there's going to be a loser and there's going to be a winner, and the winner is the federal government and the loser is the TPLF, we will not be in a position to seek for cessation of hostilities. That in turn means the grim statistics that Alex Dawal mentioned earlier will not have an end in sight. We are poised to see the death of thousands and thousands of people because of hunger. We are also going to see a complete obliteration of the Tigrayan economy. As Tamrat said, the impact, he mentioned it earlier, the impact, we will see the more aggravated version of that. We would also see a lot more suffering and death of civilians because of the ongoing war. So this in turn is having a very heavy weight on the way and the shape of the Ethiopian state. The Ethiopian state, that's the oldest in Africa, even going by the state narrative itself, is up for a very vicious rupture, because this spoiled politics is not imagining the reintegration of the Tigrayan population into the body politics of the Ethiopian state. We are headed into, going into the second point, we are headed into an election the coming Monday, an election that is not only happening in Tigray, but also has no prospect whatsoever as to when it's going to happen. It means after the election, Ethiopia will embark on a formation of a new state. And nobody has neither the legal nor the constitutional argument as to how the people of Tigray are going to be represented into becoming a member of this newly being reconstituted Ethiopian state after the election. And this leaves the prospect of the political participation of the entire population of the Tigray regional state in limbo. And it will further push the people into giving up on the idea of the Ethiopian state in itself. And this is the risk we are running by refusing to stop the war. In addition, of course, of prolonging the suffering of the people. A lot of people are arguing today on the side of the government, saying if the TPLF could stop fighting, the war will be over. So the TPLF should surrender and the war can be over, so the political process can start. Again, this will return me back to the point that I mentioned earlier. This dismisses the dynamics of this war, which has morphed into a full-blown rebellion against the Ethiopian state. So if we do not have an understanding and a reading, an honest reading of the nature of the war that's happening today, we will be having a very violent fracture of the Ethiopian state as we go by reforming and forming a new state after the election. So this is the political fallout, in addition to, of course, the humanitarian crisis that Alex Dawal aptly pointed out. Thank you very much.